The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Cole Briggs read it standing at the workbench in the back of his shop, still wearing the gloves he had been using to pull a cracked head gasket from a 2003 Kubota. He read it once. Then he pulled off his right glove, smoothed the paper flat against the steel surface, and read it again. The rent was going up 40%. He had 45 days to meet the new rate or vacate the property. He stood there for a while without moving. The shop smelled the way it always smelled in the morning oil and cold metal, and the faint chemical bite of penetrating fluid. Outside, a crow called once from somewhere near the grain bins across the road, and then went quiet. Cole folded the letter along its original crease, slid it into his shirt pocket, and went back to the Kubota. He finished the job. He always finished the job. Cole was 34 years old and had been working on engines since he was old enough to hand his father a socket wrench without being asked which size. His father, Gene Briggs, had run a one-man operation out of a rented barn in Granger County, Iowa for 22 years. He had never advertised. He had never needed to. Farmers in Granger County knew the name Briggs the way they knew the name of a reliable rain gauge or a fence post that never rotted. You used it when you needed it, and you were grateful it existed. Gene died 8 years ago. A heart attack, quick and without theater, in the middle of replacing a PTO shaft on a neighbor's John Deere. He was found in the afternoon by the neighbor's teenage son, who had come out to check on why the work had gone quiet. Gene was 61 years old. He had no savings to speak of, no life insurance policy worth mentioning, and no debts. He had left Cole the tools, the knowledge, and a single piece of advice delivered over many years in many forms, but always meaning the same thing. The quality of your work is the only advertisement you will ever need. Cole had taken that and built Briggs Mechanical 6 years ago, renting an old converted dairy barn on the south edge of town from a landlord named Earl Purcell, who was fair and slow to raise rates, and who had died 14 months ago. His son, who lived in Minneapolis and had never set foot on a farm in his adult life, had inherited the property, and 3 months ago, that son had sold the building to Derek Slade. Cole had not known that at the time of the sale. He found out the way most people in Granger County found out things that affected them. After the fact, from someone else standing in a parking lot. Derek Slade was 41 years old and ran a chain of 9 automotive and agricultural service centers spread across 4 counties in western Iowa. The chain was called Slade Precision Auto and Ag. The name was printed in blue and silver on 11 vehicles on road signs at the edge of every town where a branch operated, and on the kind of promotional calendars that end up on the walls of feed stores and county offices. Slade had a business degree from a university in Chicago. He wore clothes that cost more than most Granger County residents spent on groceries in a month. He drove a black truck with a custom grill that he traded in every 2 years, whether or not anything was wrong with it. He had come to see Cole 2 weeks before the letter arrived. It was early morning. June was sitting on her stool near the back corner of the shop where Cole had set up a small folding table with her coloring books and a thermos of apple juice. She was 6 years old and had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of watching things carefully before deciding what to think of them. She was coloring a horse when the black truck pulled into the gravel lot outside. Slade came in without knocking. He looked around the shop the way a man looks at something he is already in the process of dismissing. His eyes moved across the tools on the wall, the 2 vehicles Cole had in for service, the exposed concrete floor that Cole swept every morning without exception. Then his eyes found Cole and stayed there. He said he had a proposition. Cole set down his wrench and listened. Slade said he was opening a 10th location in the spring, just outside of Granger County, on the highway corridor. He needed a lead technician. Someone with real hands-on experience, not just certification hours. He had heard about Cole from 3 different farmers and had looked into his work. He said Cole was exactly the kind of man he was looking for. The salary he offered was nearly double what Briggs Mechanical had cleared in its best year. Cole listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said no. Slade's expression did not change immediately. He asked why. Cole said he was not interested in working for someone else's operation. Slade looked around the shop again, slower this time. He looked at the patched roof over the bay doors at the second-hand air compressor. Cole had rebuilt himself at the crack running along the base of the east wall that Cole had filled with hydraulic cement 3 winters ago. He looked at all of it the way a man looks at evidence in a case he has already decided. He said, and he said it clearly enough, that June could hear it from her stool in the corner, that the market in this county had changed. That independent shops running on reputation and handshakes were a different era. That Cole was a talented man, wasting himself on a dream that the world had already moved past. Cole did not respond. Slade said the offer would remain open for 1 week. Then he looked over at June, who had stopped coloring and was watching him with the particular stillness of a child who understands more than she is supposed to. He said nothing to her. He looked at her the way he had looked at the cracked wall. Then he walked out. The gravel crunched under his truck tires, and then the sound faded down the county road, and the shop was quiet again. June said, "Daddy, who was that man?" Cole picked up his wrench. "Nobody important," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her horse. He did not take the offer. And 14 days later, the letter arrived. The building he had operated out of for 6 years. The building that still had his father's name scratched into the concrete threshold. From the day they had poured the patch together, now belonged to Derek Slade. And the new lease terms had been written in a way that Cole understood immediately were not meant to be accepted. They were meant to force a decision. He finished his morning work. He dropped June at her school because it was a regular Tuesday and she had a reading lesson she liked. He told her he would pick her up at 3. She said, "Okay." She hugged him around the middle the way she always did, her arms barely reaching. And then she walked through the school doors without looking back. Because she was the kind of child who trusted that the people she loved would be where they said they would be. Cole drove. He did not have a destination. He just needed the feeling of the truck moving under him. The white lines of the county road pulling him forward with the quiet indifference of geography that does not know or care what a man is carrying in his shirt pocket. The fields on either side of County Road 11 were soft with early spring. The soil had that dark, wet color that comes after the frost breaks the color. That means possibility if you are a farmer, and means nothing at all if you are not. He had $38 in his wallet. He had a truck with 160,000 miles on it that he maintained himself and trusted completely. He had a daughter who thought he could fix anything. He had a shop that would stop being his in 45 days. He thought about his father. Gene Briggs had never once in his life worked for another man after the age of 22. He had never made a lot of money. He had never owned the land under his feet. But every morning he had gone to work knowing that what he did mattered to the people who needed it done, and that was a thing he had considered sufficient. Cole was not sure in that moment on County Road 11 that he had the same certainty his father had carried. He was thinking about that when he saw the machine. It was a John Deere 6M series, an older model somewhere between 2008 and 2011. By the look of it, sitting at a hard angle in the shallow drainage ditch along the left shoulder of the road. The hood was propped. A thin thread of something not quite smoke, not quite steam, drifted up from the engine compartment and dissolved in the light April air. Standing beside the tractor was a woman. She was not young. She was wearing a canvas work shirt the color of old pine worn through at the left elbow, and work pants tucked into rubber boots, caked with the same dark spring mud that lined the ditches on both sides of the road. She had a hat with a short brim pulled low. She was holding a phone to her ear, but she was not speaking into it. She lowered the phone and looked at it. Then she looked up at the sky the way people look when they are not panicking but they are calculating. Cole slowed the truck. He rolled down the window. He said, "You need a hand." The woman looked at him. Her eyes were dark and steady and entirely without the particular kind of helplessness that sometimes appears in people who are accustomed to having problems solved for them. There was no performance in her expression, no relief that someone had stopped, just a measured consideration of the new variable that had presented itself. She said, "Depends on whether you know what you are looking at." Cole pulled onto the shoulder. He cut the engine. He told himself he would be a few minutes. He got out of the truck and walked to the tractor and looked at the engine without touching anything yet. He stood there for a moment just listening, which was a habit his father had taught him, and which most mechanics trained on diagnostic equipment had never learned to do. Then he leaned in. 4 minutes, maybe 4.5. The hydraulic pump had a failed seal. Not catastrophically, not yet, but far enough along that the system was losing pressure under load, which was why the machine had lost traction authority and drifted into the ditch when she had tried to push through soft ground near the shoulder. The timing was also running slightly retarded, which told Cole the issue had been building for a while, weeks at minimum, and that whoever serviced this machine last had either missed it or had not been looking at the right things. He stood up. He said, "The hydraulic pump seal is gone. Timing is off too, probably from running with low system pressure for a while. I can get it mobile enough to drive it home. You will need a proper repair inside of 2 days, or you will be looking at a full pump replacement instead of just a seal." The woman was watching him. She had the quality of someone who listens in the same way that good land holds water, completely without waste. She said, "Can you tell the difference between a failed seal and a cracked pump?" "Housing just from looking." Cole said on this model, yes. The pressure drop pattern is different. Cracked housing loses fluid in a different distribution. This is a seal failure at the primary fitting. The housing is fine, she said, and the timing. "Are you adjusting that here or leaving it?" He said, "Leaving it. I do not have the right equipment to set it properly on the road. What I can do is compensate for it manually in the way I bring the system back online so it does not stress the pump on the way home. That gives you the window you need." She nodded once. She was not nodding because she was agreeing to let him proceed. She was nodding because he had given her information she had evaluated and found to be accurate. Cole went to his truck. He kept a basic field kit behind the seat, not for roadside work specifically, but because his father had kept one, and Cole had continued the habit without ever making a conscious decision to do so. He pulled out what he needed. He had been working for about 8 minutes when the truck door opened and June climbed out. She walked over in her school shoes and her purple jacket and stood beside her father and watched with the focused, unhurried attention of someone for whom watching things work was a form of nourishment. She did not speak immediately. She looked at the tractor, at the open engine compartment, at her father's hands. The woman looked at her. She said, "What is your name?" June said, "June Briggs." The woman said, "Do you know what your father is fixing right now?" June thought about it for a moment. She said, "The pump part, the leaky one. He showed me once with a jar of water so I could see how it works. When the seal inside gets old, it lets the water go where it is not supposed to go, and then the pressure goes away, and the machine stops working right." The woman looked at the girl for a long moment. There was something in that look that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition, but was somewhere between the two. The way a person looks when something confirms what they had already begun to suspect. Cole finished the temporary fix in just under 30 minutes. He brought the system back online carefully, monitoring pressure by hand, the way you can only do if you know what normal feels like through a tool, rather than on a screen. The machine coughed once and then steadied. He ran it at low throttle for 2 minutes, watching, listening. Then he eased it up. It was rough, but it would move. He told her what to tell the shop she took it to. He told her specifically what to ask for and what to make sure they checked beyond the obvious repair. He wrote it on the back of a receipt from his glove box, because he did not have anything better to write on. He handed it to her. She looked at it. Then she took a card from the chest pocket of her work shirt and held it out to him. He took it but did not look at it. He was already thinking about the timing on the drive home. She reached into her other pocket and produced 2 folded $50 bills. Cole shook his head. She said you spent half an hour on this. He said, I know. She said that is worth something. He said, I do not charge for doing what is right. She looked at him. Not the way people look at someone who has said something they find admirable. The way people look at something they are trying to understand the full dimensions of. She said that is a very specific thing to believe in. He said my father believed it first. I just kept it. She stood with that for a moment. Then she put the bills back in her pocket. She said, thank you. She said it simply without the inflation people put into gratitude when they feel they owe something they cannot repay. He said, get it to a shop by tomorrow if you can. She said she would. Cole told June to get back in the truck. June went, but slowly pausing once to look back at the woman standing by the tractor. The woman was watching them go with an expression that Cole had, he turned around, might have spent a long time trying to read. He did not turn around. He got in the truck. He pulled back onto County Road 11 and drove north toward town. The letter in his shirt pocket pressed lightly against his chest with each breath. The fields moved past, dark and quiet, and indifferent to everything a man was carrying. June said she had nice eyes. Cole said, yeah. June said she was listening to you the whole time. Not the way people pretend to listen. The real way. Cole looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. He said you notice things. June said, you always say that like it is a surprise. He almost smiled. He drove. He thought about the 45 days in his pocket, and the $38 in his wallet, and the shop with his father's name scratched into the threshold, and the fact that in all of it, in all the weight of it, he had stopped. He had stopped because there was a person who needed help, and he was someone who could give it. And that had been the whole calculation beginning and end. He had not looked at the card she handed him. It was sitting on the seat beside him. He picked it up at a stop sign where County Road 11 met the highway. He read the name. He set the card down. He sat at the stop sign a little longer than was necessary. Behind him, June had fallen asleep with her cheek against the window, and her purple jacket bunched up under her chin. The fields stretched out in every direction under the thin April sky. A red-tailed hawk worked a slow circle over the tree line to the east, tilting without effort, reading the air below with complete authority. Cole drove home. He did not tell anyone what he had read on that card. He put it in the breast pocket of his jacket when he got home and hung the jacket on the hook by the door. He made dinner for June eggs and toast because it was what they had, and she liked it. He helped her with the 3 words she was supposed to practice from her reading lesson. The words were found known and remember. She practiced each one carefully. When she got them all right, she looked up at him with an expression so unguarded it was almost difficult to look at directly. Then she went to bed. Cole sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she was asleep. He looked at the card again. He turned it over. There was nothing on the back. He set it face up on the table and looked at the name printed on it in plain dark type. The name was Vera Weston. Below the name, the card said, Weston Land and Grain Holdings. Below that it said, Granger County, Iowa, with an address and a phone number. He knew that name. Everyone in agricultural Iowa knew that name. Weston Land and Grain was not the kind of company that advertised on county road signs or left promotional calendars in feed stores. It did not need to. It operated at a scale that was simply a given fact of the landscape, the way the Missouri River was a given fact, or the price of corn in October. Vera Weston had built the company over 4 decades from a single inherited farm that had been, by all accounts, nearly worthless at the time of inheritance. She had never sold. She had expanded through drought years and debt years and years when the commodity markets had driven neighboring operations into foreclosure, one after another. Cole did not know her story in detail. He knew the outline the way you know the outline of things that are simply always present in the world you live in. He sat for a while more. Then he got up, washed the dishes, and went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about his father, who had refused money from people he helped. Because he said a man who only helped when there was something in it for him was not really helping. He had said it differently at different times over the years, but it always meant that. Cole had never expected anything to come from the way he moved through the world. He had not expected Briggs Mechanical to make him wealthy. He had not expected his wife to stay. He had not expected his father to live to see June walk. He had learned slowly, and without a specific moment of learning, that expectation was a kind of debt you took on against the future, and the future did not honor it reliably. He had stopped because there was a person in a ditch who needed help. That was all. That was the whole of it. Outside the window, the Iowa night was absolute and still. Somewhere far out in the dark, in fields that ran flat and unbroken to the horizon, the soil was doing what it did every April, releasing winter, receiving warmth, preparing for whatever came next, without opinion or resistance. Cole Briggs closed his eyes. He did not know, lying there in the ordinary dark of a Tuesday night in Granger County, that 2 days from now his phone would ring and the man on the other end would introduce himself, not as a neighbor or a customer, or anyone Cole had ever spoken to, but as the legal counsel and operations director of Weston Land and Grain Holdings. He did not know that the 45 days in his shirt pocket were no longer the shape of his future. He did not know any of it yet. He just lay there and breathed, and the house was quiet. And down the hall his daughter was asleep with her hand open on the pillow, the way children sleep when they feel completely safe. And outside, the dark fields held their breath and waited. He did not sleep well. That was not unusual. He had not slept well in 2 years, not since the house stopped being the kind of house where 2 people moved through it at different hours, and the sounds of another person were a form of company even in the dark. Now the sounds were just the house itself, the settle of old wood, the furnace cycling, June turning over in her bed down the hall. He was up before 5. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the card in front of him and did not touch it. He drank the coffee and watched the window lighten by degrees from black to gray to the pale, colorless light of early April in Iowa. Then he put the card in his jacket pocket, woke June, made her oatmeal with the brown sugar she liked on one side only, and drove her to school. She fell asleep in the truck on the way back, which she sometimes did when she had been up in the night, thinking about things she did not tell him. He carried her inside and put her on the couch with the blanket from the back of the chair and let her sleep. He went to the shop and worked. The next day was the same, and the day after that. On the 3rd morning, his phone rang at 8:47 while he was torquing the head bolts on the Kubota he had finally gotten back to after the interruption of Tuesday. He looked at the number. He did not recognize it. He almost let it go to voicemail. He answered it on the fourth ring. The man on the other end had a measured voice, the kind of voice that has delivered important information many times and has learned to do it without inflection. That might prejudice the listener before they have heard everything. He said his name was Thomas Greer. He said he was calling on behalf of Vera Weston. Cole set the torque wrench on the bench very carefully, the way you set something down when you need your hands free to think. Greer said that Ms. Weston had asked him to reach out, that she had taken the tractor to a certified dealer as Cole had advised, that the repair had been confirmed precisely as Cole had described it down to the compensating technique he had used to bring the system online without stressing the pump, that Ms. Weston had been paying attention to more than the machine on County Road 11. Cole said, "What is it she is looking for?" Greer said that Ms. Weston would prefer to discuss the details in person. He said she was not a woman who conducted meaningful conversations through intermediaries if she could avoid it. He gave Cole an address. He said Thursday at 9 in the morning if that was possible. Cole said he would need to make arrangements for his daughter. Greer said that Ms. Weston had specifically said that if Cole needed to bring his daughter, that was entirely acceptable. There was a pause that lasted a few seconds. Cole said, "I will be there." He hung up and stood in the shop without moving for a while. The Kubota sat open on the lift with its head bolts waiting. The shop smelled the same as it always smelled. Nothing about the room had changed. He picked up the torque wrench and finished the job. That afternoon, he drove to the office of Ray Hutchins, which occupied the front 2 rooms of a house on Maple Street that Ray had converted 15 years ago, when the rent on the commercial space across from the courthouse had gone up past what a one-man legal practice in Granger County could comfortably sustain. Ray was 58 and had known Gene Briggs since they were young men and had done what legal work Gene occasionally needed, which was not much, and had attended his funeral, and had told Cole afterward with the plain-spoken directness of a man who does not dress up difficult things that Gene had been one of the genuinely good ones, and that the world ran a little worse without him in it. Ray was at his desk when Cole came in. He looked up over his reading glasses. Cole handed him the card. He told him about the phone call. Ray took the card and turned it over once. Then he typed something into his computer with 2 fingers, which was how Ray typed everything and turned the screen around. It was a page from a business publication. There was a photograph. The woman in the photograph was standing at the edge of a harvested field in work clothes looking at something beyond the frame. She was not posing. She did not look like someone who posed. The headline above the photograph said something about the largest privately held grain operation in the upper Midwest. Cole looked at the photograph for a moment. Ray turned the screen back. He said, "Cole, whatever she wants. You go." Cole nodded. Ray said, "Do you want me to come with you?" Cole said no. He said it without hesitation and without explanation. Ray nodded once, and that was the end of it, because that was how they communicated in the particular shorthand of men who have known each other across enough years that most things do not need to be said fully. Cole drove home. He did not tell June where he was going Thursday. He told her they were taking a drive in the morning and that she could bring her sketchbook. She said, "Is it a good drive or a we have to drive drive?" He thought about it. He said he was not sure yet. She accepted that with the equanimity she applied to most things and went back to drawing horses on the back of an envelope. Thursday came cold and clear. The sky over Granger County was the hard, pale blue of early spring that offers light without warmth, the kind of sky that makes distances look shorter than they are. Cole wore the cleanest shirt he owned that was also a work shirt because he was not going to wear something that was not a work shirt to a meeting about work. He drove with June in the passenger seat because she was old enough now that she did not always need the booster, and he was letting her practice sitting up front on roads where there was no traffic. She watched the fields go by. She said the dirt looks different this time of year. He said it is different. It is waking up. She thought about that. She said, does it know it is waking up? He said, I think it does what it is built to do without needing to know what to call it. She nodded seriously as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. The address Greer had given him led them off the county road onto a gravel lane that ran straight for about a quarter-mile between two windbreaks of mature cottonwood, before opening into a working yard that was large, organized, and entirely without ornamentation. There were equipment sheds with their doors standing open, the interiors dark and orderly. There was a grain handling system off to the right, the augers and bins arranged with the functional precision of something that had been placed once and never moved because it was right the first time. There was a low building at the back of the yard that might have been an office or might have been a maintenance shop or might have been both. Standing in the yard wearing the same canvas work shirt she had been wearing on County Road 11 was Vera Weston. She was not standing with her arms crossed or with the posture of someone waiting to receive a guest. She was standing beside a combine that was parked in the open air at the edge of the yard, and she was looking at it the way you look at something that has presented you with a problem you have not yet solved. A John Deere S790, a newer machine. 3 men in Weston Company shirts were standing nearby with the particular stillness of people who have been trying to fix something for a long time and have run out of ideas to try. She looked up when Cole's truck came into the yard. She raised one hand, not in greeting exactly, more in acknowledgement. The gesture of someone who knew you were coming and had not stopped working while they waited. Cole parked. He told June she could come or stay as she liked. She got out and brought her sketchbook. Vera Weston walked toward them. She shook Cole's hand. Her grip was the grip of someone who has used their hands every day for a long time. No rings. No watch. She looked at June without the performance of delight that adults sometimes put on for children. She said, June. June said, yes, ma'am. Vera said, do you remember me? June said you had the tractor on the road with my dad. Vera said that is right. She said it simply as a confirmation rather than praise. Then she looked at Cole. She said, I have a machine with a problem my people have been working on since yesterday morning. I would like your opinion on it. She did not preface it. She did not explain what was at stake, or why she had called him specifically, or what she thought the problem might be. She just offered him a machine with a problem and waited. Cole said all right. They walked to the combine together. The 3 Weston technicians stepped back, not with resentment, but with the resignation of men who have been humbled by something and are willing to let someone else try. Cole looked at the machine. It was a 2017 model, well-maintained from the exterior. None of the oxidation or deferred care you sometimes saw on working equipment that got used hard and stored casually. He asked if he could hear it run. One of the technicians started it. The engine came up cleanly. Cole listened to the engine note for about 30 seconds. Then he walked around the machine slowly, his hands in his pockets, not touching anything. Then he stopped at the right rear corner of the cab and crouched down and looked at a bracket assembly that was visible only from that angle. He stayed there for a while. He stood up and asked the technician to disengage the header drive and re-engage it 3 times in succession while he watched a specific component. The technician did it. On the second engagement, Cole saw what he was looking for. The feeder house sensing array had a secondary moisture sensor that had been installed at a 3mm lateral offset from its correct position. Not enough to be visible from a standing inspection, Not enough to produce a consistent error code, just enough that over 3 seasons of vibration and thermal expansion, the sensor's calibration had drifted past the threshold where the combine's automation could compensate for it on its own. The machine's processing system was interpreting the skewed moisture readings as variable crop conditions and continuously overriding the feed rate to compensate for conditions that did not exist. The machine was in effect fighting itself. Cole explained it to Vera while the technicians listened. He said the diagnostic tablet would not catch it because the system was not actually malfunctioning from a software perspective. It was doing exactly what it had been programmed to do. The problem was in the physical position of the sensor, which was a mechanical installation error, not an electronic one. Fix the position, recalibrate by hand, and the override behavior would stop. One of the technicians said we ran full diagnostics twice. Cole said, I know. The diagnostics confirmed the software was working. That is not the same as confirming the machine was working. There was a silence. Vera said how long to correct it. Cole said 40 minutes if I have the right tools. Vera looked at the technicians. One of them brought a tool bag. Cole worked. June sat on the running board of Cole's truck nearby and sketched the combine with her pencil, moving in long, careful lines. Not the quick strokes of a child making a picture, but the deliberate observation of someone recording what they see. Vera stood at a distance and watched Cole work. She did not hover. She did not offer suggestions. She watched the way she had watched him on County Road 11 with the quality of complete attention. That is also complete patience. 38 minutes later, the machine ran a test cycle without a single feed rate override. The technicians looked at each other. Vera looked at Cole. She said, "Where did you learn to see something like that?" He said, "I saw the same failure pattern on a different machine 4 years ago on a farm outside Denison. Different brand, same sensor logic. Once you have seen how a machine defeats itself from the inside, you do not forget what it looks like." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Come inside." She said it to Cole. Then she looked at June and said, "You too." The office building at the back of the yard was exactly what it looked like from the outside. A working space. Bookshelves with binders organized by year and category. A desk with actual paper on it. A coffee maker on a side table that appeared to have been running since early morning. No awards on the walls. No framed photographs with important people. One large topographic map of Granger County pinned flat on the long wall with small marks on it in 3 different colors of pen that Cole understood were field designations. Vera poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if Cole wanted one. She poured a cup of apple juice from a small refrigerator without asking if June wanted it. June accepted it and sat in the chair nearest the wall and opened her sketchbook and began drawing the map. Vera sat across from Cole at the work table. She said she was going to tell him what she had in mind, and she would say it plainly, because she found that plain speech saved everyone a great deal of time. She said Weston Land and Grain operated 4 working facilities in Iowa. Combined, those facilities ran 380 pieces of equipment, ranging from planting machines to combine harvesters to grain handling and irrigation systems. She said they had service contracts with a regional provider for the past 3 years. She named the provider. Cole recognized the name. It was one of Derek Slade's competitors. Not a bad operation, but one that serviced their clients on a schedule, not on a need, which meant that problems were sometimes identified late and sometimes fixed by technicians whose knowledge was wide but not deep. Vera said the contract was up for renewal at the end of the month. She was not renewing it. She was looking for a service relationship with someone who understood machines the way machines actually worked, not the way their diagnostic systems said they worked. She set a document on the table between them. She said, "This is what I am offering." She said he should take it to whoever he trusted and have it reviewed before he responded. She said she expected a response within the week, but that, if he needed more time, she would wait. Cole looked at the document. He looked at the first page, which contained the summary of terms. He looked at the monthly retainer figure, and then he looked at the wall for a moment. He said, "This is a real document." She said, "All my documents are real." He said, "I have a shop with 41 days left on its current lease. I have one employee who works 3 mornings a week. I have tools and 2 vehicles in for service and a compressor I rebuilt from parts." She said, "I know what you have. I had Thomas pull your business registration and your county license records before I asked him to call you." She paused. "I also had him call 3 farmers in Granger County, whose equipment you have serviced in the past 4 years." She looked at him steadily. They all said the same thing. He waited. She said, "They said you do not leave until it is right, and you do not charge for things you did not do." He looked at his coffee. Outside the window of the office across the yard, Derek Slade's world was coming apart at its circuits and its promises, though. Cole did not know this yet. What had begun 3 days earlier on the same Tuesday night that Cole had lain awake reading Vera Weston's name on a card in the dark was a software update. Automatic. Unattended. The kind that large systems run in the overnight hours when no one is watching. The update had been pushed by the German engineering firm, whose diagnostic platform powered the central hub of Slade Precision's newest facility. The one Slade had built on the highway corridor, the one he had been planning as his flagship location. The one he had been intending to staff with Cole Briggs as lead technician until Cole had said no, and Slade had decided to make Cole's independence untenable instead. The update had contained an error. Not a large error. Not the kind that announces itself dramatically. A small foundational error in the calibration baseline for the pneumatic diagnostic tools. The kind that causes every reading to be slightly off in a way that compounds over time and across machines. By Wednesday morning, every vehicle that had been assessed by the diagnostic system in the past 36 hours had received incorrect readings. Service recommendations had been generated based on those readings. Parts had been ordered. Repairs had been scheduled. All of it was wrong. The technicians had not known immediately. The error was not obvious. It surfaced first in the field when 2 pieces of farm equipment that had received clean assessments and been returned to their owners failed within hours of each other in the same morning. One was a planter. One was a grain cart drive system. Both failures were traced back to conditions the diagnostic had rated as acceptable. By Thursday morning, when Cole was sitting in Vera Weston's office, looking at a retainer figure that made him want to look at a wall Slade was in his new facility, standing in front of a row of darkened diagnostic screens, while his technicians tried to reach the German firm's support line and were being told that the minimum restoration window was 48 hours. The contract, as Slade had written his flagship's first quarter around a service agreement with the Granger County Agricultural Cooperative covering 212 pieces of equipment for a spring readiness check, had a penalty clause. If the service window was missed by more than 24 hours, the cooperative had the right to void the agreement and seek a replacement provider at Slade's expense. The clock had been running since 6:14 that morning. Slade called 3 equipment dealers. He called 2 independent shops he had previously declined to work with because he considered them beneath the Slade Precision brand. He called a technician in Des Moines who had done freelance work for him before and who quoted him a rate that made Slade's jaw tighten. He paid it. It was not enough. The Des Moines technician arrived, looked at the scope of what needed to be done manually without the diagnostic platform, and said he could get through maybe 30 units in the time available. The cooperative needed 212. By Thursday afternoon, the penalty was triggered. The cooperative's operations manager, a woman named Sandra Briggs, who was no relation to Cole, but who had used Briggs Mechanical twice, and had been one of the 3 farmers Thomas Greer had called, voided the agreement in writing and faxed the termination to Slade's main office. Cole did not know any of this was happening while he sat in Vera Weston's office and took the document from the table and said he would have someone look at it and respond within the week. He did not know it when he and June drove home through the hard, pale afternoon light, with the cottonwoods along the lane casting long shadows across the gravel. He did not know it when June fell asleep again in the passenger seat with her sketchbook in her lap, open to the page where she had drawn the topographic map from Vera's wall, rendered in pencil, with an accuracy that a person twice her age would have struggled to match. He only found out 2 days later on Saturday morning when Ray Hutchins called him. Ray said he had looked at the document thoroughly. He said it was legitimate in every particular. He said the retainer alone before any additional service calls was more than Briggs Mechanical had cleared in the previous 8 months combined. He said Cole should understand that if he fulfilled this contract and did the kind of work he was capable of doing, he would not be in the same position in 2 years that he was in today. Then, Ray said, there is something else. He told Cole about the cooperative agreement. He told him about the diagnostic failure at Slade's facility. He told him that Sandra Briggs had voided the Slade contract that morning, and that the cooperative was looking for a replacement service provider. Cole was quiet for a moment. Ray said, I told Sandra you might be available to discuss it. I hope that was all right. Cole said, yeah, Ray. That was all right. He hung up and stood in the kitchen for a while. The morning was doing what April mornings in Iowa did, arriving slowly, the light coming in low and flat through the east window and moving across the floor as the earth turned. June was still asleep. The house was quiet in the particular way it was quiet on weekend mornings, when there was nowhere they had to be. He thought about the 41 days in his shirt pocket, which had become 38 days, and he thought about the way math works when the variables change. He thought about his father, who had once told him that the world has a way of finding people who do their work honestly, and that the finding sometimes takes longer than a man would like, but that it comes. He had not believed that entirely when his father said it. He had believed it the way you believe something a person you love tells you, with loyalty rather than conviction. Standing in his kitchen on a Saturday morning with the light moving across the floor, and his daughter asleep down the hall, and a contract on the table that Ray Hutchins had said would change his position permanently, he believed it differently now, not with loyalty, with evidence. He picked up his phone and called Sandra Briggs back. The call to Otis Carver lasted 11 minutes. Otis said he had wondered when Cole would call. He said it without irony, without the performance of someone who wants credit for having predicted something. He said it the way a man says something that is simply true, and that he sees no reason to dress up. The property on the north edge of town was still available. The previous interested party had fallen through 6 months ago. The building needed work on the ventilation in the East Bay, but was otherwise sound. Otis named a monthly figure. Cole said he would come look at it Monday after the cooperative work. Otis said your father would have liked the yard. It is a good yard. Cole said he knew. He hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment with the phone in his hand, looking at nothing in particular, the way you stand after a conversation that has confirmed something you were not entirely sure of until it was confirmed. Then he washed his hands and made dinner, and they ate at the kitchen table, he and June, in the quiet companionship that had been the texture of their days for 2 years now, and that he had stopped experiencing as an absence and had come to experience as something with its own particular weight and value. June said, "Is things getting better now?" He looked at her. She was eating without looking up, moving her fork in the way she did when she was asking something she had been holding for a while. He said, "Yeah, things are getting better." She nodded. She still did not look up. She said, "I thought so. You are sleeping different." He said, "How can you tell?" She said, "Because in the morning you do not look like you have been somewhere hard all night." He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You notice things." She looked up. She said, "You always say that like it is a surprise." He smiled. He actually smiled without effort, the way smiling happens when it is not being produced for anyone. The week that followed was one of the longest and most fully occupied of Cole's working life, and he moved through it with a steadiness he had not felt in longer than he could precisely name. He and the two men he had brought in, whose names were Walt Geary and Phil Drummond, continued through the cooperative's equipment inventory with the same systematic focus they had established from the first morning. Walt was 61 and had the unhurried precision of a man who had fixed enough things incorrectly in his youth to have learned that the time saved by rushing is always spent twice over later. Phil was 57 and talked less than Walt, which was saying something, but had a particular gift for hydraulic systems that Cole had seen firsthand on a job in Audubon County 3 years prior and had not forgotten. They worked well together in the way that people work well together when everyone present has the same understanding of what the work is for. Not for the invoice, not for the compliment, for the machine. And through the machine for the person who depends on it, and through that person for the season and the field, and the thing that comes out of the field at the end of it. By the following Wednesday, they had cleared 147 units. Cole filed the documentation each evening at the kitchen table after June went to sleep, entering each assessment in the ledger in the format his father had used, date and identifier, and finding an action and outcome, the handwriting steady and unhurried and entirely legible. Sandra Briggs came out to the yard on Wednesday afternoon and walked through the assessed equipment with a clipboard and the expression of someone who is looking for something to be wrong and is having difficulty finding it. She checked 6 units at random against Cole's documentation. Each one matched. She put the clipboard under her arm and looked at Cole with the frank directness that was apparently simply how she communicated with everyone. She said, "You document better than any shop I have worked with in 11 years. Cole said, "My father kept records the same way." He said, "If you cannot write down what you did and why, you do not fully understand what you did and why." Sandra said, "I am going to want to talk to you about a longer arrangement with the cooperative when the spring work is done." Cole said he was open to that conversation. She nodded and walked back to her truck and drove out of the yard with the no-nonsense efficiency of a woman who had 17 other things to get to before the day ended. Walt watched her go. He said, "She reminds you of anyone?" Cole said a little. Walt said, "I thought so." They went back to work. On Thursday of that week, the thing Cole had not been thinking about walked through the door of his present situation in a way that required him to think about it. He was at the cooperative yard doing a final check on a grain cart drive system when Phil appeared at the door of the shed and said there was a truck in the lot that had been sitting for about 10 minutes without anyone getting out. Cole recognized the truck before he was fully outside. Black custom grill this year's model, because the previous year's model had apparently developed the defect of being 12 months old. He walked across the lot. Derek Slade got out when Cole was about 15 feet away. He was wearing what he always wore, the clothes of a man who wants you to know. The clothes are expensive. He looked different than he had the morning he came to the shop. Not smaller exactly, but less certain of the geometry of the room, which was now a gravel lot on a working property rather than a converted barn he had recently purchased the deed to. He said Cole's name, just the name without any of the framing he had used before. Cole stopped and waited. Slade said he had heard about the Weston contract. Cole said nothing. Slade said the cooperative contract, too. Cole said nothing. Slade looked past Cole at the equipment shed, at the organized industry of the yard, at the 2 trucks with Briggs Mechanical on the doors, that Cole had gotten the magnetic signs made for the previous Friday. He looked at all of it, and then he looked back at Cole with an expression that was not quite enough of any one thing to be named. Not remorse, not anger. Something in the territory between them. The particular expression of a man who has lost something and is still working out the full dimensions of what it was. He said, "I came to tell you I am not renewing the lease on the Maple Street property." Cole said, "I know. I have 31 days remaining on the original terms." Slade said, "I am not going to hold you to that." He said it without looking away. He said, "You can have the rest of the month without the obligation. I will send a letter to make it official." Cole looked at him for a moment. He said, "I appreciate that." Slade said, "The offer I made you, the lead technician position." Cole said, "I remember it." Slade said, "I thought if I could get you inside the operation, it would make the whole thing work better." He stopped. He said I was wrong about how I went about it. He said it plainly without the inflation of a formal apology and without minimizing it either. Just the fact stated in clear language by a man who had run out of the energy required to state it any other way. Cole said, "All right." That was the whole of it. No elaboration, no expansion. Just the acknowledgement received and set down and left there, because there was no useful purpose served by doing anything else with it. Slade got back in his truck. He drove out of the lot. Cole watched him go and then turned and walked back to the grain cart drive system he had been checking. Walt was leaning against the shed door. He said, "What did he want?" Cole said, "To tell me something he should have said differently the first time." Walt considered that for a moment. He said, "Did he?" Cole said, "Close enough." Walt said, "All right then," and went back inside. The following Monday, Cole walked through the former implement dealership on the north edge of town with Otis Carver. Otis was 72 and walked with the slightly rolling gait of a man who has spent decades on uneven ground and whose body has simply adapted. He carried a flashlight even though the power was on because he said there were corners in old buildings that light switches did not reach, and he preferred to see things for what they were. The building was larger than the current shop by a factor Cole had not fully appreciated from the outside. The main bay could accommodate 6 vehicles simultaneously, with room to move between them. There was a parts storage room that could be reorganized into a proper inventory system. There was a small office at the front with a window that looked out over the yard. There was a separate wash bay that needed new drainage, but was otherwise usable. The East Bay ventilation that Otis had mentioned was a straightforward fix, a matter of replacing 2 damaged panels and clearing the intake ducts. Cole walked the space slowly. He looked at the walls and the floor and the ceiling and the load-bearing elements. He opened doors and looked inside them. He crouched in the corner of the main bay where the floor met the wall and looked at the joint. He stood in the center of the space and turned once slowly. Otis watched him and said nothing. Cole said, "I will take it." Otis said, "I thought you might." He handed Cole a key on a plain ring. He said the first month was prepaid as of the handshake. He said the lease paperwork would be ready Thursday. He said one more thing. He said your father fixed my baler 3 times over the years. Never once charged me more than the parts. I told him every time he was leaving money on the table, and he said every time that the table was fine. He paused. I have been hoping somebody with that name would end up in this building for a while. Cole took the key. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would not be less than what the moment warranted. He drove to the school and picked up June and drove her to the building and walked her through it. She went in ahead of him, turning slowly in the center of the main bay, the same way Cole had turned, looking at the ceiling and the walls and the corners. She had her sketchbook. She did not open it yet. She said, "It is big." He said, "It is going to need to be." She walked to the small office at the front and looked through the window at the yard. She said, "You can see everything from here." He said, "That was what I thought." She turned around and looked at him. She said, "Can I have a corner?" He said, "You can have the same corner you always have." She nodded. She went to the corner nearest the window and sat down cross-legged on the concrete floor and opened her sketchbook and began drawing the empty bay from that position. The perspective of the corner looking out the space and the light and the large rolling doors at the far end standing open onto the April yard. Cole stood in the center of the space and watched her draw. He thought about the morning 3 weeks ago, when he had stood in his old shop with a letter in his shirt pocket and $38 in his wallet, and had driven out on County Road 11 with nowhere particular to go. He thought about the particular quality of that morning, the weight of it, the way the road had pulled him forward without offering any specific destination. He had not known what he was driving toward. He had only known that moving was better than standing still, and that stopping to help someone who needed it was simply what you did when you were someone who could. He had not stopped because he expected anything from it. That was the part he kept returning to, not as a lesson exactly, more as a fact he wanted to hold clearly without embellishment, the way you hold the finding in a ledger plain and specific and true. He had stopped because it was right. Everything that had followed the call from Thomas Greer and the meeting in Vera's yard, and the contract on the table, and the cooperative and the new building and the key in his pocket, and June sitting in the corner drawing the shape of the future from the inside. All of it had followed not because he had planned it or worked toward it or positioned himself for it. It had followed because of a single unremarkable decision made on a county road on a Tuesday morning by a man who was not trying to be seen. The day before the move, Cole drove out to the old shop on Maple Street one last time. He went alone in the early morning before June was up, while the town was still in the particular quiet of a weekday before 7. He unlocked the door and went in and stood in the middle of the space. He looked at the walls where the tools had hung for 6 years. The outlines of them were still faintly visible on the painted concrete, the ghost shapes of wrenches and pullers and sockets in their organized rows, the negative space of his work. He looked at the repaired wall in the east corner, the hydraulic cement fill now painted over that he had done on a February night 3 winters ago with borrowed light and cold hands. He looked at the ceiling he had patched, the compressor mount he had welded himself, the drain in the floor he had rerouted when the original routing turned out to be wrong. He was not a man given to ceremony, and he did not make a ceremony of this. He just stood in it for a few minutes, the way you stand in a place you are leaving, not to say goodbye exactly, but to acknowledge that it was real, and that it mattered, and that the time spent in it counted. Then he walked to the threshold. He crouched down and looked at the concrete. The scratch was still there, just inside the doorframe on the left side. 2 letters, GB. His father had made it years ago on the day they had poured the patch together, pressing the letters in with a flathead screwdriver before the concrete set, not deep enough to trip over, but deep enough to last. Cole put his finger in the groove of the letters. He stayed there for a moment. Then he stood up, walked out, pulled the door shut behind him, and locked it for the last time. He posted the key through the mail slot in the doorframe. He heard it land on the concrete inside with a small, flat sound. He walked to his truck. He got in. He drove north. The new building was lit when he arrived. Walt and Phil had already pulled in, and Walt had the coffee going on the portable unit they had been using at job sites for years. The battered aluminum percolator that Walt refused to replace because he said the new ones made coffee that tasted like ambition, without follow-through. The smell of it reached Cole before he was through the door. They moved the shop that day in the practical, unhurried way of men who understand that the work is the point and that the talking about the work is not. Equipment was loaded and unloaded and positioned and repositioned until it was right. The tool wall was rebuilt from the ground, up in the same organization Cole's father had established, not because Cole required it to be identical, but because the organization was genuinely correct, and there was no reason to change what was correct simply for the sake of having changed it. June came after school. She went directly to her corner. Cole had brought her stool, the original one from the old shop, and set it in the position she had designated. She climbed up on it and looked at the space from her established height, and nodded once with the solemn satisfaction of someone confirming that the world has arranged itself properly. She said, "It smells different in here." Walt said, "New shop smell. Give it a week." She said, "What does it smell like after a week?" Walt said, "Like work that needed doing got done." She thought about that. Then she opened her sketchbook. 3 weeks after the move, on a morning in late May, when the fields outside Granger County were fully green and the planting season was at its height, Cole drove out to the first of the 4 western facilities to begin the formal assessment that the contract required. Greer had sent the access details and the equipment inventory 2 days prior. Cole had reviewed it the night before at the kitchen table, making notes in the margin in the same pencil he used for everything, going through the list of 380 machines with the attentiveness of someone who is not preparing for an exam, but for actual work on actual things. The facility was east of the county on land that had been in production for longer than most families had been in Iowa. The site manager, a man named Dix Calloway, no relation to anyone, met Cole at the gate with the wariness of a person who has seen service providers come and go and who reserves judgment until he has watched someone work. Cole shook his hand. He said he would like to start with the combine fleet because those were the units that would face the heaviest load the soonest. And because if there were systemic issues anywhere in the inventory, that was where they were most likely to surface first. Dick said most contractors start with the smaller stuff because it is faster to clear. Cole said, "I know." Dix looked at him for a moment and then said, "All right," and led him to the equipment sheds. Cole worked through that first facility over 3 days. He found things. Not catastrophic things, not yet, but the early signs of deferred attention that accumulate over time. In any large operation, small hydraulic seals beginning to seat unevenly, a sensor array on one of the planners that was showing the same lateral drift issue he had seen on Vera's combine, a bearing on a grain cart that had another few hundred hours in it, but not many more than that. He documented each finding precisely and recommended a prioritized action sequence that put the highest risk items first, regardless of whether they were the most convenient to address. He left the documentation with Dix at the end of day 3. Dix read through it at his desk with Cole sitting across from him. He read slowly and without expression. When he finished, he looked up. He said, "You found things our last service provider said were fine." Cole said, "I know." Dix said, "The bearing you flagged on Unit 7. We had that looked at 8 months ago and were told it had at least a full season." Cole said, "It might have 8 months ago. Things change on working equipment." Dix said, "If we had put that unit into the field next week." Cole said, "You would have found out about it in the field." He paused. "Those are the kind of findings that are a lot cheaper to address in a shed." Dix closed the folder. He said, "I have been running equipment in this county for 19 years. He said, I'm going to call Sandra Briggs tonight." Cole said, "All right." Dix said not to complain. Cole said, "I figured." There was a brief quiet, and then Dix did something Cole had not expected. He laughed. It was a short laugh, the laugh of a man who is not often surprised and who recognizes that he has been surprised and finds it acceptable. He stood and put his hand out. Cole shook it. He drove back to Granger County in the long May light that stretched the shadows of the cottonwoods across the county roads in thin lines pointing east. The radio was off. The windows were down. The air smelled of turned earth and the particular sweetness of spring in Iowa. When everything that was gonna grow has decided to grow and is in the process of doing so with complete commitment. He thought about his father on the drive home. He thought about him often, not with grief exactly, not anymore, but with the particular quality of attention you give to someone whose influence is still actively present in your life, even though the person is not. Gene Briggs had not left Cole money or property or a network of connections or a business plan. He had left him a way of being in the world that turned out to be worth more than any of those things, not because it was a strategy, but because it was not. The shop on the north end of town was lit when Cole pulled in. Walt was finishing the last job of the day, a neighbor's tractor that had come in that morning. Phil had gone home an hour earlier. June was on her stool in the corner with a library book in her lap, a thick one about how weather works, which she had checked out 4 days ago, and was reading for the second time. Cole hung his jacket on the hook by the door. June said without looking up, "Did you find anything?" He said a few things. She said important things. He said the kind that are important before they become obvious. She turned a page. She said, "That is the best kind to find." He went to the bench. There was nothing urgent waiting, just the ordinary rhythm of the end of a working day, tools to clean and account for documentation to finish the small inventory of tasks that close out a day properly. He worked through them in order. The shop settled into its end-of-day quiet, the particular stillness of a space where serious work happens, and where the seriousness remains in the air, even when the work has paused. Outside the window, Granger County was doing what it did in the long evenings of late May, going about the business of spring, with the unhurried certainty of a place that has been doing this for a long time and knows how it ends. The fields were green and full and patient. The sky was the color of something beginning. Cole finished the last entry in the ledger. He set the pencil down. He looked at the page for a moment, at the neat columns of what had been found, and what had been done, and what the outcome had been. Then he closed the book. He looked over at his daughter. She had fallen asleep on the stool with the weather book open in her lap, her head tilted back against the wall at the angle of someone who went down all at once because they had simply used up the day. Her pencil was still in her hand. He walked over. He took the pencil carefully from between her fingers without waking her. He looked at the sketchbook that was open on the small table beside the stool. The last drawing on the page was the view from her corner of the new shop. The rolling doors at the far end standing open, the afternoon light coming in at a low angle, and in the center of the frame, seen from behind, a man bent over a workbench with his tools arranged around him and his attention fully given to the thing in front of him. Cole looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he picked up his daughter weather book and all and carried her to the truck and drove home through the green May evening with the windows down and the warm Iowa air moving through the cab, and the fields running past, on both sides dark and alive, and full of everything that was coming next.